My name is Helena, and I'm 45 years old. I've lived in the same quiet suburban neighborhood for over 2 decades. It's the kind of place where the mailman knows your dog's name, and neighbors peek through curtains to see who's visiting. Our home, my home, isn't just a house. It's where every chapter of my life unfolded. My late husband, Richard, and I built it from the ground up 25 years ago. Back then, we had little more than dreams and determination. We saved every penny, painted every wall ourselves, and celebrated when we could finally afford the big oak table that still sits in the dining room today. Every corner of this house holds a piece of us, of him. Our only son, Daniel, grew up here. I still remember the sound of his tiny feet running down the hallway, the late-night giggles when he thought I couldn't hear him sneaking snacks from the kitchen, and the way Richard used to chase him around the garden pretending to be a monster. This house was and always will be home. When Daniel got married 3 years ago, I was overjoyed. I'd always dreamed of seeing him happy, building a life of his own. His bride, Sophia, was everything people noticed at once: gorgeous, elegant, and confident to the point of arrogance. She had a laugh that could light up a room and a way of speaking that made every word sound like a declaration. At first, I welcomed her with open arms. I wanted her to feel like part of the family. But from the moment Sophia stepped through our door, I sensed something polished, performative. She didn't just want to belong, she wanted to dominate. When Daniel and Sophia married, they decided to stay with me for a few months while they saved for their own place. I agreed without hesitation. But what I didn't realize was that I was inviting a storm into my peaceful home. Within days, Sophia began to take over. She rearranged furniture without asking, swapped my favorite curtains for some modern alternatives, and started giving friends virtual tours of the house on her phone. At first, I laughed it off. But one afternoon, I overheard her introducing the house during a video call. "And here's our dining room," she said proudly, panning her phone across the room I had designed decades ago. I went for a rustic modern look. The lighting was totally my idea. I froze. Her idea? I had picked that chandelier myself after saving for 6 months. I'd even hung it with Richard on a rainy Sunday. My blood boiled quietly, but I bit my tongue. Sophia wasn't done. She started filming home decor tips for her social media channel. My living room, my family's sanctuary, became her backdrop. She'd pose in front of our fireplace, saying things like, "When designing your home, you want to create a warm, inviting atmosphere just like I did here." Each time she said, "my home" or "I designed," it felt like a pinprick to my heart. Still, I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. Daniel seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the overbearing mother-in-law. But the day that changed everything came on a Saturday morning. Sophia had invited some friends over for brunch. I was setting up coffee when I heard one of them gasp, "Wow, this place is incredible. Did you and Daniel buy it recently?" Sophia laughed lightly. "Yes," she said. "We're lucky it's our first home together. Daniel's father left it to us." My hands went cold. I stood there, completely still, coffee mug trembling in my grasp. Left it to them? That was an outright lie. Richard had passed away only a year earlier, and he never left the house to anyone, not yet. I stepped into the room, my voice calm but firm. "Actually, dear, Richard didn't leave the house to anyone. This is still my home." Sophia's smile froze for a split second, then quickly returned. "Oh, of course, Helena," she said smoothly. "I just meant that we're lucky to live here with you for now." Her friends exchanged awkward glances, clearly sensing tension. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I could tolerate pride, vanity, even a little selfishness, but lying about ownership? That crossed a line. From that moment on, Sophia's behavior grew bolder. She started hosting small events at the house, dinners with influencers, photo shoots for her online brand. She'd post captions like, "Proud homeowner moment," or "So blessed to live in our forever home." Each post felt like another twist of a knife. People began congratulating Daniel and Sophia for buying such a beautiful house. Even neighbors began asking when I planned to move into a smaller place now that the newlyweds had taken over. I smiled through clenched teeth, keeping my dignity intact. I refused to let gossip ruin my peace or Richard's memory. But deep down, anger and hurt brewed like an approaching storm. What made it worse was Daniel's silence. Whether he noticed and ignored it, or simply didn't want to confront his wife, I didn't know. But his lack of response made me feel invisible in my own home. Still, I held my head high. Let Sophia play her games. Let her bathe in attention and likes. The truth had a way of revealing itself eventually, but that revelation came from the notary on a day Sophia would never forget. Richard's death changed everything and opened a door for greed I never expected. When my husband passed away 2 years ago, it felt as if the air had been sucked out of the world. Richard wasn't just my partner, he was my anchor. For 25 years we had built a quiet, beautiful life together. We had our ups and downs, but he was the kind of man who fixed what was broken, whether it was a leaky faucet or my bad mood. He died suddenly, without warning. One moment he was in his workshop fixing an old chair, and the next, he was gone. A heart attack. Just like that, I became a widow at 43. The days after the funeral passed in a blur. Daniel tried to stay strong, though I saw the pain in his eyes. He'd been close to his father, and losing him broke something inside him. What I didn't realize then was that it also broke the last bit of balance in our family. Sophia, on the other hand, treated the tragedy differently. She cried, yes, but there was something oddly rehearsed about it. She wore black dresses and pearls to every family gathering, always making sure people saw her dabbing at her eyes. She called Richard Dad for sympathy, though she had only known him for a short while. And within days, her focus shifted. I still remember the first time she brought up the house. We were sitting at the dining table, going through condolence letters when she asked casually, "So, Helena, what happens to the house now?" I blinked, not sure I heard her right. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, swirling her coffee with a silver spoon. "Since Richard passed, I was wondering if Daniel will be added to the title? You know, for security." I stared at her for a moment. Security. That word echoed in my mind. The kind of security she meant wasn't emotional, it was financial. I took a deep breath. "Sophia, nothing changes for now. Richard and I owned the house together, and all the legal matters will be handled properly." She smiled sweetly, but I caught the glint in her eyes. Of course. Just asking. These things can get messy." I tried to let it go, thinking maybe it was nerves. Losing someone can make people anxious about the future. But as the weeks went by, her curiosity about the house turned into obsession. She started asking about property taxes, insurance, even the mortgage details. "Just so we're informed," she'd say with that saccharine tone. Daniel never seemed to notice. He thought his wife was just being helpful. I didn't want to drive a thick wedge between them, so I stayed silent, though each question she asked felt like a test of patience. We held a small memorial gathering a month later, with close friends and family. The house was full of flowers and quiet murmurs. At one point, I saw Sophia leading a few guests on a little tour. She spoke about our plans for renovation and the new color scheme for the living room. I stood at a distance, watching her perform as if she were auditioning for a role. The guests nodded politely, probably thinking it was her way of coping. But I knew better. Sophia was laying the groundwork for something, and I could feel it in my bones. After the memorial, she began changing things around the house. She replaced the family portrait above the fireplace with a glossy black and white wedding photo of herself and Daniel. She took down Richard's framed fishing license from the hallway and replaced it with a trendy abstract print. Every change felt like an erasure. Like she was trying to overwrite the life Richard and I had built with her own aesthetic, her own ego. I told Daniel that the changes were making me uncomfortable. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, she's just trying to make the place feel like home. You know how she is." Yes, I knew exactly how she was. Then came the final straw. One evening, I walked into the living room and found Sophia recording another video for her followers. She was standing in front of the fireplace, smiling into the camera, saying, "Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm giving you a tour of our dream home, the one we inherited after Daniel's father passed. It's a bittersweet blessing, but we're grateful." My body went rigid. She had said inherited, not borrowed. Not sharing. Inherited. When she noticed me standing there, she quickly ended the video, pretending nothing was wrong. Sophia, I said slowly, don't you think that's a bit misleading? She tilted her head and gave me that polished smile. Oh, it's just a figure of speech, Helena. People like the story, it's relatable. Relatable? I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. You're talking about my husband's death like it's part of a brand deal. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she just shrugged and walked away. That night, I sat alone in Richard's study, looking through the old photos and paperwork he'd kept neatly filed. I missed him so much my chest ached. I wished he were there to guide me, to tell me what to do about this woman who was slowly poisoning everything we'd built. It was then, as I sifted through the folders, that something caught my eye. A name printed on an envelope that didn't belong. An envelope addressed not to me, but to the executor of the estate of Richard Ward. And that was the moment I realized Sophia's greed had gone far deeper than I ever imagined. And soon, I found the first clue that proved she was planning more than a makeover. If I hadn't opened that envelope, Sophia would have gotten away with everything. That night, I sat in Richard's old study long after everyone had gone to bed. The faint smell of cedar and paper still lingered in the air, a scent that always made me feel safe. As if Richard was still nearby. I ran my fingers along the shelves he built himself, tracing the worn edges of the folders labeled in his neat handwriting. That's when I saw it, a single cream-colored envelope tucked between two thick binders. It looked out of place, clean and new among all the dust-covered files. It was addressed to the executor of the estate of Richard Ward. No return address. Just that simple, official title printed in sharp black ink. My name wasn't on it, but curiosity got the better of me. After all, I was Richard's wife, surely I had the right to know what it contained. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The moment my eyes landed on the first line, I felt my stomach twist. It was a letter from a law office, Reynolds and Harper Legal Services, addressed directly to Sophia Ward. The contents made my blood run cold. It began with a polite greeting, followed by a discussion about the upcoming probate process and potential transfer of real property from Richard's estate to his next of kin. The lawyer had outlined steps for confirming eligibility of spousal inheritance through marital extension. I read it again and again, trying to make sense of it. Why was Sophia involved in something about my husband's estate? Richard had never listed her as anything related to ownership. She'd only been married to Daniel for barely 3 years before he passed away. Then one sentence nearly made me drop the paper. Once probate is finalized, we may proceed with restructuring ownership of the family home to include both Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Ward as joint inheritors. It felt like a punch to the gut. Sophia wasn't just pretending the house was hers, she was actively trying to make it so. My hands shook as I turned the page, scanning the fine print. The lawyer referenced ongoing communication and financial documents provided by Mrs. Sophia Ward. That meant she had already been working behind my back, gathering information and plotting. For a long moment I just sat there, stunned. I thought of every smile, every sweet thank you she'd given me in that syrupy voice. All of it had been calculated, every gesture, every compliment, just another move in her silent game of takeover. I folded the letter back into the envelope and pressed it to my chest. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The next morning, I knew exactly who I needed to call: my oldest friend, Margaret. She had worked at a notary office for over 20 years before retiring. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was her. Margaret came by later that afternoon, her graying hair tied back, and her sharp eyes immediately scanning the letter. She read every line carefully, then looked up at me with an expression that mixed concern and disbelief. "Helena," she said slowly, "this woman is trying to transfer ownership through your husband's estate." "But Richard never put her name on anything," I replied, my voice shaking. "Then she's fishing," Margaret said firmly, "trying to see if she can use Daniel's inheritance rights to slip her way in." You need to find out exactly who owns the house whose name is on that deed right now. I frowned. Wouldn't it be Richard's and mine? We bought it together. Margaret hesitated. Maybe. But sometimes, especially if refinancing or legal changes happened, the title might have shifted. Did you and Richard ever refinance or update your mortgage? I thought for a moment. Years ago, yes, when Daniel was in college. Then you should check, she said, tapping the letter. You might be surprised by what you find. Her words lingered long after she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Sophia's smug smile, the way she'd claimed the house as hers, how confidently she'd spoken about inheritance. She wasn't just arrogant, she was strategic. She must have believed that Richard had left the house in both our names, and that his death meant Daniel would inherit half. That would make her co-owner by marriage. It was a cruelly clever plan. But there was one flaw she hadn't counted on. Richard was always 2 steps ahead of everyone. The next morning, I dressed carefully, grabbed my handbag, and drove downtown to the county records office. The clerk behind the glass smiled politely as I handed her the property address. I just need a copy of the ownership deed, I said, trying to sound calm even though my heart was racing. She typed for a few moments, then said, Sure thing, Mrs. Ward. Just a moment. When she returned with a Stasten Leifer printed document, she handed it to me with a polite nod. Here you go. It's always good to keep a copy for your records. I thanked her, but I barely heard my own voice. My eyes had already found what I was looking for. Under the line marked registered owner, it said, Helena Ward, sole proprietor. I blinked. I read it twice, then a third time. My knees nearly gave out. My husband had transferred ownership to me years ago. I was the sole legal owner. Richard must have done it when he refinanced, quietly protecting me in ways I never even realized. Tears filled my eyes as I clutched the paper to my chest. Relief, grief, and gratitude collided inside me all at once. Richard had thought ahead. He had known that someday, I might need this safeguard. For the first time since his death, I smiled a real, heartfelt smile. Sophia could play her little games all she wanted. But this house wasn't hers. It wasn't Daniel's. It was mine. I folded the deed carefully and tucked it into my purse. As I walked out of the records office into the bright morning sunlight, I felt something new stirring inside me, calm, powerful, and certain. She thought she could steal what Richard built for me. She thought wrong. I had no idea that what I'd find next would turn Sophia's smug smile to dust. I never expected my late husband to have left me one last, secret gift. When I stepped out of the county records office, the sunlight felt different, brighter, warmer, almost protective. I stood on the sidewalk clutching the printed deed like it was made of gold. In a way, it was. It wasn't just a legal document. It was Richard's voice from beyond the grave, whispering that he'd always be watching over me. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at my name printed clearly under the words, sole proprietor. It was real. It was official. This home, our home, was mine, completely and irrevocably. I couldn't help but let out a shaky laugh through tears. Richard had always been meticulous with finances. He used to joke that paperwork is love, in bureaucratic form. I used to roll my eyes whenever he said that. But now, he had thought ahead, perhaps knowing that life could twist in ways we couldn't predict. As I drove home, I thought back to that refinancing moment Margaret had reminded me about. It was almost 10 years ago, during Daniel's college years. Richard had handled all the forms because I was busy managing the household. I remembered signing a few papers, but I hadn't paid much attention. He must have changed the title back then, putting the home fully in my name for financial protection, as he'd told the bank. It was the most selfless act of foresight I'd ever known. When I arrived home, Sophia's car was already in the driveway. My heart tightened. I took a deep breath before walking inside. She was in the kitchen, filming another video, her phone propped on the counter. "Oh, hey, Helena," she said sweetly when she noticed me. "I was just showing my followers how to host a brunch in your own home without breaking the bank." Your own home. The phrase echoed like a taunt. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked past her, holding my purse tightly. I could feel her gaze on me, probably trying to figure out why I was so quiet. That evening, I called Daniel. He came by after work, and we sat in the living room, our living room. "Mom, what's wrong? You've been distant lately," he said. I hesitated. I didn't want to turn him against his wife, but I couldn't stand the lies anymore. "Daniel," I said softly, "I found something today, something about the house." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I handed him the printed deed. He studied it for a moment, confusion flickering in his eyes. "It's under your name." "Just yours?" "Your father changed the ownership years ago. It's been mine ever since." He looked stunned. "So the house was never part of Dad's estate," I finished for him. "Sophia's lawyer letter was nonsense. She has no claim to it." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I didn't know she was talking to a lawyer." I believed him. He looked too bewildered to be lying. "I think she's been planning something behind your back, sweetheart," I said gently. He sighed heavily. "I'll talk to her." But deep down, I knew talking wouldn't change Sophia's ways. She didn't listen. She schemed. That night, I lay awake thinking about how to handle this. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to throw the deed on the table and watch her arrogance shatter. But another part of me, the part Richard had taught to be patient, wanted to wait. Let her believe she's winning, I told myself. Let her keep lying publicly, digging her own grave. Over the next few weeks, Sophia continued her charade with even greater confidence. Her social media presence exploded. She started calling herself a homeowner and lifestyle mentor, posting tips filmed in my kitchen and garden. I watched quietly as her videos gained traction. Thousands of people commented about how elegant her home was, how lucky she must be to have inherited it. Sometimes, neighbors would stop me while I was walking the dog and say, "Helena, your daughter-in-law's videos are so inspiring. That house looks just like yours." I smiled politely and said, "That's because it is." Inside, though, I was calm. Calm like a storm right before lightning strikes. A few days later, Sophia hosted a home showcase party for her followers. It was supposed to be a small event, at least that's what Daniel told me, but dozens of cars filled the street that evening. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching people I didn't know wandering through my house, snapping photos, sipping champagne, and marveling at Sophia's style. She wore a sleek black dress and floated through the rooms like a queen showing off her palace. I overheard one guest say, "This place is gorgeous. You must be so proud of your inheritance." Sophia smiled broadly. "It's our family's legacy," she said. I clenched my fists. That was it. The performance had gone too far. The next morning, I called the notary office where Richard's documents had been finalized years ago. The same notary, Mr. Langford, was still there. I explained that I had the deed and needed official confirmation of ownership, something formal. He was kind and efficient. "Of course, Mrs. Ward," he said. "I remember your husband well. A very thoughtful man. I'll prepare the verification documents for you. And if you'd like, we can arrange a family review session to make everything clear to everyone involved." A family review session. The words hit me like an idea straight from Richard himself. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "That would be perfect. If Sophia wanted to play pretend in front of the world, I would let the truth be revealed in front of her. But not by me, by a professional. By the law, by the very system she tried to manipulate." The timing couldn't have been more poetic. I just needed the right moment to reveal the truth, and that moment came sooner than I expected. It started as an innocent interview, but Sophia made one fatal mistake on live television. A few weeks after I confirmed the truth with the notary, I thought the storm had finally settled. I had the deed, the paperwork, and the satisfaction of knowing the truth sat safely in my desk drawer. But Sophia wasn't finished, not even close. Her ego had grown faster than her following. Each week she posted new videos, giving home tips, walking viewers through the rooms, and boasting about her so-called inheritance. I tried to stay detached, to remember that her lies didn't change reality, but each clip stung like a slap. Then, one morning, As I was sipping coffee, I turned on the TV to catch the local news. The host's voice made my blood run cold. Up next, she said cheerfully, local influencer and lifestyle coach Sophia Ward shares her secrets to home design and legacy living. Legacy, the word made my stomach tighten. And there she was, Sophia sitting on the studio couch, dressed to perfection. Her hair was flawless, her smile radiant, her tone dripping with practiced humility. She thanked the host for inviting her, then began speaking as if she were some kind of home-owning expert. "It's been such a blessing," she said. "My husband and I inherited this beautiful home from his late father. We wanted to honor his memory by keeping it exactly as he left it. Classic, timeless, and filled with love." My grip on the coffee mug tightened. She was lying to hundreds of viewers without blinking. The host leaned forward, smiling warmly. "That's wonderful, Sophia. What a lovely tribute. So, your father-in-law gifted the house to you both?" Sophia nodded confidently. "Yes, it was his wish for us to continue the family tradition. He always said the house would be ours someday. We're so grateful he made that happen before he passed." Before he passed. My husband never said that, not once. He'd made sure I was protected. Not that she'd get her hands on what he built. I turned off the TV before I could hear another word. My heart pounded, and my hands shook with a mix of fury and disbelief. She hadn't just crossed the line, she'd erased it completely. Minutes later, my phone began to buzz. Friends, neighbors, even distant cousins called to congratulate me, or rather, to congratulate them. I saw Sophia on TV. "She spoke so beautifully about Richard's legacy," one neighbor gushed. "She must make you so proud," another said. I smiled politely through each call, though my blood boiled with every word. Proud? I was mortified. That evening, I sat in the living room and stared at the framed family photo of Richard and me. His kind eyes seemed to look right back at me, steady and calm, as if saying, "Don't let her win, Helena." I whispered to the picture, "I won't." When Daniel came home, I asked if he'd seen the interview. He nodded awkwardly. "Yeah, Sophia told me about it. She wanted to represent the family well." "By lying?" I asked sharply. He flinched. "Mom, she just meant it symbolically. You know how she is. It's for her audience." "I know exactly how she is," I replied. "And it's time she learns who she's dealing with." That night, I called Mr. Langford, the notary who had handled Richard's affairs. I explained what had been happening, the lies, the public boasting, the confusion it was causing. He listened patiently before saying, "Mrs. Ward, perhaps it's time to make everything official in front of your family. I can arrange a verification meeting with both your son and daughter-in-law present. That way, there's no room for misunderstanding." The moment he said those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "Yes," I said firmly. "Let's do that." The notary scheduled the meeting for the following week. He would bring the original deed, signed and notarized, along with all supporting documentation showing my sole ownership. When I informed Daniel about the meeting, he seemed nervous. "Is this really necessary, Mom?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It's better to clear everything up now before more lies spread." Sophia, on the other hand, was delighted. She thought the meeting was about finalizing inheritance transfers. In her mind, she'd already won. I could see it in her smug grin as she said, "Oh, how wonderful. I'll wear something professional, this could be an important day for us." I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, it will be." Over the next few days, she bragged to anyone who would listen that the papers were finally being handled. She even told one of her friends, "Soon, everything will be in our name, officially." I stayed silent, letting her words dig her own grave. On the morning of the meeting, she appeared dressed like she was going to a magazine photo shoot, hair curled perfectly, wearing a beige designer dress and heels that clicked across the floor like punctuation marks to her arrogance. She even brought her camera equipment, telling Daniel she wanted to record "the moment we become homeowners." Daniel looked uneasy, but Sophia was too self-absorbed to notice. As I watched her fix her lipstick in the mirror before we left, I couldn't help but think how ironic it was. She had no idea she was walking straight into her own humiliation. That's when I decided to call the notary and schedule a very specific meeting. The moment Sophia saw the notary's name, her face turned pale. The morning of the meeting felt strangely peaceful. I woke up before dawn, the sky still gray and soft outside my window. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight slowly creep across the counter. Today wasn't just another day, it was the day Richard's quiet wisdom would finally speak for itself. When Daniel came downstairs, he looked uneasy. "Mom, are you sure this is necessary? Sophia's been anxious all week." I gave him a reassuring smile. "Yes, sweetheart, it's better to have clarity than confusion. Once the notary explains everything, there'll be no more misunderstandings." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't grasp what was about to happen. Sophia appeared minutes later, dressed like she was about to host a press conference. A beige designer suit. Her hair in perfect curls. Makeup flawless. Her expression was calm, but her eyes gleamed with expectation. "So," she said, grabbing her purse, "this is just a formality, right? To make sure everything transfers properly after your husband's passing?" "Something like that," I replied, slipping the folded deed into my bag. She didn't notice my tone, she never did. The car ride was quiet except for Sophia humming along to some upbeat pop song. Daniel tapped the steering wheel nervously while I stared out the window, feeling the weight of the moment build with every passing mile. When we pulled into the notary's parking lot, Sophia's confidence seemed to double. "I've always loved this part of town," she said breezily. "So professional, so established. This is where real people handle real business." I hid a small smile. She had no idea what kind of business was about to be handled today. We stepped into the notary office, sleek wooden furniture, quiet air conditioning humming, the faint scent of polished leather and paper. Behind the counter sat Mr. Langford, a tall man in his 60s with a warm but firm demeanor. He rose when he saw me. "Mrs. Ward," he greeted, shaking my hand. "Good to see you again. I have the documents ready, just as you requested." Sophia's posture straightened immediately. "Oh, you must be the notary who handled my father-in-law's estate," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Langford nodded politely but didn't return the same enthusiasm. "Yes, I handled Mr. Richard Ward's estate filings. A very prudent man, your father-in-law. Please follow me." We walked into a private conference room. There was a long table, neatly arranged folders, and 3 glasses of water waiting. Sophia sat down gracefully, crossing her legs and opening a notebook as if she were at a business meeting. Daniel looked between us, confused but calm. I could tell he wanted to believe this was all routine, but tension was already building in the air. Mr. Langford began, his voice steady and professional. "We are here to review property ownership documentation related to the home located at 142 Maple Drive. The purpose of this session is to clarify current ownership and any existing legal obligations tied to it." Sophia gave a satisfied nod. "Perfect. We've been wanting to finalize everything since the inheritance process started." He paused, looking at her evenly. "Inheritance process?" "Yes," she said confidently. "The house Richard left behind my husband and I have been preparing to transfer it into our names." Mr. Langford leaned back slightly. "I see. Well, I think it's best we begin with the official record before we proceed with any assumptions." He opened a thick manila folder and pulled out several papers, spreading them across the table. The room fell silent except for the sound of pages sliding against one another. Sophia leaned forward eagerly. "That must be it, the deed. Mr.?" Langford adjusted his glasses and began to read aloud. "Property registration document for 142 Maple Drive. Registered owner, Mrs. Helena Ward. Date of ownership transfer, August 17, 2015. Sophia blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Wait, 2015? That can't be right. Richard was alive then." "That's correct," Mr. Langford said calmly. "Mr. Ward refinanced the home at that time and transferred full ownership to his wife. The documents are signed, witnessed, and notarized. I handled them myself." Her smile faltered for the first time. There must be some mistake, she stammered, glancing at Daniel. Didn't your father say? Daniel frowned. Dad never said anything about that, Sophia. Mr. Langford continued, undeterred. Following Mr. Ward's passing, no further changes were filed. The property remains under Mrs. Helena Ward's sole ownership, with no shared or inherited claims. The silence that followed was so thick it was almost physical. Sophia's hand froze on her pen, her jaw tightening. I sat still, calm. My fingers folded neatly in my lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice rising. That can't be. Richard wouldn't do that. He loved his son, he wouldn't just cut him. Out! Mr. Langford's tone didn't waver. Mr. Ward did not cut anyone out, Mrs. Ward. He simply ensured his wife would have security. This home was intended to remain hers, no matter what. Sophia turned to Daniel, her voice desperate now. Say something. You know this isn't fair. Daniel looked at me, confusion in his eyes. Mom, is this true? I nodded softly. Yes. Daniel, your father made this decision years ago. He wanted me to be safe. You will always have a home here, but legally, it belongs to me. Sophia's cheeks flushed a furious red. Her composure cracked like glass. This is absurd. I've invested so much into that house. I redecorated it. I maintained it, Mr. Langford interrupted firmly. Redecorating does not equate to ownership, Mrs. Ward. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For once, she was speechless. Daniel reached over and touched my hand gently. Mom, he said quietly. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I squeezed his fingers. It's not your fault. Sophia stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll talk to my lawyer. You're free to do that, Mr. Langford replied calmly. But the documents speak for themselves. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, heels clicking furiously against the tile floor. The sound faded down the hallway until the door slammed shut. Daniel sighed, his head in his hands. I can't believe this. I placed the deed on the table and looked at Mr. Langford. Thank you, I said softly. He nodded. Your husband was a wise man, Mrs. Ward. He knew this day might come. I smiled faintly. Yes. And now it finally has. The very first sentence shattered every illusion Sophia had ever created. The property at 142 Maple Drive is legally owned by Mrs. Helena Ward. The silence was deafening. Those were the exact words that came from Mr. Langford's mouth. Crisp and absolute. They sliced through the air like a knife, leaving nothing but stillness in their wake. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Sophia's smile, her carefully curated, camera-ready smile, dissolved completely. Daniel stared blankly at the papers spread before us, his mind clearly struggling to process what he'd just heard. My heart beat steadily in my chest, calm and sure for the first time in months. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was speaking loudly enough on its own. Sophia broke the silence first. This has to be some kind of mistake, she stammered. Her voice wavered as her confidence cracked. My lawyer said inheritance law would apply automatically. Daniel's the only son, so that means he inherits, and Mr. Langford looked up from his documents with polite patience. Mrs. Ward, inheritance applies to the deceased's assets. This house was not part of your father-in-law's estate when he passed. It was transferred years before his death. Therefore, it never entered probate. But, she began again, her words faltering. He continued, unbothered by her rising tone. The deed was filed with the county clerk's office on August 17, 2015. It was notarized by me personally. Mr. Ward expressed a clear intention to protect his wife from any future disputes or financial risks. Everything about this document is valid and binding. Sophia's hand trembled as she pointed at the papers. He can't just, I assure you, Mrs. Ward. Mr. Langford said calmly. He could. And he did. Daniel finally looked up at me, his expression full of confusion and guilt. Mom, Did Dad ever tell you he did this? I shook my head softly. No, I only found out recently. He must have wanted to protect me without making a fuss about it. Sophia let out a hollow laugh, trying to regain her composure. So that's it? Everything we've done, every plan we made, it means nothing? I've poured money and time into that house, Helena. I gave it life. Her voice rose in pitch, desperation edging every word. I folded my hands neatly on the table. Sophia, you didn't give it life. That house already had a soul long before you stepped foot in it. My husband and I built it from scratch with love, not for vanity or videos. Her jaw tightened. So, what, you're just going to keep it to yourself? Pretend I never mattered? I'm not pretending anything, I replied evenly. I'm simply acknowledging what's true. The documents speak for themselves. The room went quiet again, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands, clearly overwhelmed. Maybe we should all take a breath, he muttered, trying to ease the tension. Sophia shot him a glare. Don't you dare defend her. Your father wouldn't have wanted this. I looked at her steadily. You didn't know my husband, Sophia. You knew his money, his name, his legacy. But you never cared to know the man behind them. Her lips parted, but she had no rebuttal. Mr. Langford cleared his throat and placed the original deed back into its folder. Mrs. Ward, he said, looking at me. I'll have a certified copy sent to your address. That way, there's no confusion in the future. Thank you, I replied quietly. Sophia's anger was barely contained. Her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. You're not going to get away with this, she hissed. I'll contest it. I'll take this to court if I have to. Mr. Langford leaned back slightly, his tone firm but courteous. You are, of course, entitled to pursue any legal avenue you wish. However, I should warn you that contesting a fully notarized, signed and registered deed without grounds is highly unadvisable. The way he emphasized that last word made even Sophia pause. Daniel sighed. Sophia, please stop. This isn't helping. She turned on him sharply. You're siding with her? With your mother? She manipulated this whole thing. Enough, he said, his voice finally firm. Mom didn't manipulate anything. You did. You lied to everyone for what? Likes? Followers? Her eyes widened, wounded more by his tone than the words. I was trying to build something for us, she said defensively. By lying? He shot back. By telling people a house you don't even own was yours? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel pity, only a quiet sadness for the son who had to see his wife for who she truly was. Sophia gathered her purse in trembling hands, her voice shaking. I can't believe this. You'll regret humiliating me like this, Helena. Both of you will. I remained calm, meeting her gaze steadily. Sophia, this isn't humiliation. This is truth. You did that to yourself. With that, she spun around and stormed out of the office, her heels striking the floor in sharp, furious clicks. The sound grew fainter until the door slammed shut behind her. The silence that followed was both heavy and liberating. I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift off my chest. For the first time in years, the air around me felt clear, like I could finally breathe without pretending everything was fine. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. I don't even know what to say. I placed my hand over his. You don't need to say anything. This isn't your fault. He nodded weakly. I thought she loved me, Mom. I'm sure she loved the idea of you, I said softly. But love built on greed never lasts. Mr. Langford gathered the remaining documents and smiled kindly at me. Mrs. Ward, I'll send you the certified copies this afternoon. You can rest easy now. Thank you, I said again, my voice steady but thick with emotion. He extended his hand to Daniel. And you, young man, should be proud of your father. He was a wise man who loved his family, enough to plan ahead. Daniel gave a small nod, unable to meet his eyes. As we left the office, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the pavement. Daniel walked silently beside me, lost in thought. I didn't speak either. Words felt unnecessary. The truth had been spoken, read aloud, and recorded forever. When we reached the car, Daniel finally said, "Mom, what are you going to do now?" I smiled faintly. "Live my life, Daniel. The one your father made sure I'd always have." But as we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Sophia wasn't the type to admit defeat quietly. I'd seen the rage in her eyes, the pride in her voice. No, she wasn't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. However, Sophia wasn't done yet. She had one more plan up her sleeve. Sophia couldn't handle losing the spotlight, so she decided to fight back. For a brief moment after the notary meeting, I allowed myself to believe that things would settle down. I thought that once Sophia had heard the truth read aloud, once the official words "sole owner" echoed through that room, she would accept defeat, perhaps even retreat with dignity. I was wrong. If there was one thing Sophia couldn't stand, it was losing control of her image. And to her, this wasn't just about a house, it was about her reputation. Her carefully crafted persona as a successful young woman, living her dream life in a beautiful inherited home, had just been ripped apart. The very next day, her retaliation began. It started subtly at first, whispered remarks, passive-aggressive comments online. She posted cryptic stories on social media, black screens with text like, "Some people will stab you in the back and smile while doing it," or "You think you know someone until money is involved." I knew exactly who she was referring to, though she never mentioned my name directly. She was too strategic for that. Then the real campaign started. She told her followers she was the victim of a manipulation by an older relative who had stolen her rightful inheritance. She spoke tearfully on camera about being betrayed by family. The comments poured in. People sympathized with her, called her strong, told her to fight back. For days, my phone didn't stop ringing. Friends and neighbors who'd seen her posts called to ask what was going on. I simply told them, "Don't believe everything you see online." I refused to play her game. But inside, I was furious. It wasn't just the lies, it was the audacity. After everything she'd done, after all the humiliation she'd caused, she still found a way to twist the story until she was the victim. Daniel, bless his heart, was stuck in the middle. He tried to defend me quietly while also trying not to provoke her, but I could tell he was exhausted. The woman he married was unraveling in front of him, and he didn't know how to stop it. One evening, he came over looking pale and weary. "Mom," he said quietly, "Sophia's been saying some things online. I'm sorry. I've told her to stop, but she won't listen." I poured him a cup of tea and said, "You can't control someone who thrives on chaos, Daniel. Let her spin her web. The truth has a way of untangling itself." He sighed. "She's angry about the notary meeting. She feels humiliated." "She humiliated herself," I replied softly. Over the following week, the situation escalated. Sophia began visiting mutual acquaintances, spinning her version of events. To some, she said I had tricked Richard into signing over the house. To others, she claimed the paperwork was forged. It was laughable, but the persistence was disturbing. I didn't want confrontation, but Sophia forced one. One afternoon, as I was watering the plants in the front yard, I saw her car pull into the driveway. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses. Her lips pressed into a hard line. "Helena," she said sharply. "We need to talk." I didn't stop what I was doing. "There's nothing left to talk about, Sophia." She walked closer, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Oh, I think there is. You embarrassed me. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." "You didn't need my help with that," I said, setting down the watering can. Her nostrils flared. "You think this is over?" "It's not. That house is as much mine as yours. I've invested in it. I've lived in it. You can't erase that." I took a slow, measured breath. Sophia, this isn't about erasing anything. It's about facts. You don't own the house, and you never will. Your lawyer knows it, the notary knows it, and deep down you know it. Her expression hardened. You'll regret this, she said coldly. I already regret letting you through my front door, I answered. For a split second, I thought she might slap me. Her hand twitched. But instead, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car. The tires screeched as she sped off down the road. Daniel called later that night, his voice strained. Mom, what happened? Sophia's furious. She said you threatened her. I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. I didn't threaten anyone. She came here looking for a fight. I simply told her the truth. He exhaled heavily. She's not herself anymore. She's obsessed with this. I know, I said quietly. An obsession only leads to destruction. I wanted to believe she'd burn herself out, that her tantrums would fade as quickly as they flared up, but I underestimated how far she'd go. 2 mornings later, I stepped outside to pick up the newspaper and froze. My front yard looked like a war zone. The flower beds Richard and I had tended together for years were torn apart. My rose bushes, his roses, had been slashed down to stumps. The white fence was spray-painted in red letters. You'll pay for this. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I couldn't even move. Then anger surged through me like fire. I took photos of everything, every broken branch, every hateful word, and called the police. When the officers arrived, they took the report seriously but gently. Do you have anyone in mind who might have done this, ma'am? One asked. I hesitated. Yes, I said finally. I think I do. Daniel rushed over as soon as I told him. He stood there staring at the wreckage, disbelief in his eyes. She wouldn't. But the look on his face said he knew she could. I'm so sorry, Mom, he said quietly. I put a hand on his shoulder. You're not the one who needs to apologize. That night, as I locked every door and turned off the lights, I realized something chilling. Sophia wasn't just angry anymore. She was dangerous. And somewhere deep down, I knew she was only getting started. That threat didn't scare me until I saw what she did next. The next morning, I woke up to find my garden destroyed and a message carved into the gate. I barely slept that night. Every sound felt louder, every creak of the old house made my pulse quicken. By dawn, I finally gave up on rest and went to make coffee. The morning air was still and gray. The kind that feels too quiet, like the world is holding its breath before something terrible happens. When I opened the front door, my heart sank. My beautiful garden, the same one Richard and I had built together over 2 decades, was in ruins. The tulips were trampled, the rose bushes uprooted, and the soil dug up in violent, uneven patches. It looked like someone had waged war against beauty itself. Then I saw the gate. Scratched into the wood with something sharp were 4 chilling words. You'll pay for this. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. My hands trembled as I reached for the gate, my fingers brushing the fresh grooves in the wood. The words were angry, messy, rushed. It wasn't a random act, it was personal. My first thought was Sophia. I didn't want to believe she could go this far, but who else would? No one else had a reason. No one else hated me enough to destroy something so precious. I ran back inside and called the police. My voice shook as I explained what had happened, and within 20 minutes a patrol car pulled into the driveway. 2 officers walked through the yard, taking photos, examining the fence, and making notes. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, turned to me. Do you have anyone in mind who might have done this, Mrs. Ward? I hesitated, but lying felt pointless. Yes, I said quietly. My daughter-in-law, Sophia Ward. The officers exchanged a glance. And why do you believe she might be responsible? I told them everything, from the property dispute to the notary meeting to the threats. They listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification. Then finally the officer said, "We'll file this as vandalism and harassment. If anything else happens, call us immediately." They offered to send an extra patrol through the neighborhood at night. I thanked them, though I knew their presence wouldn't stop Sophia if she truly wanted to hurt me. After they left, I walked through the garden in silence, trying to take in the damage. It wasn't just about flowers or fences. This garden had been my sanctuary. Richard and I had planted every bush, every flower, every vine together. It was the heart of our home, the one place that still felt alive with his memory. Seeing it torn apart was like losing him all over again. Daniel showed up an hour later. His face pale. "Mom, I came as soon as I got your message. Are you okay?" I nodded, though I could feel the tears welling up again. "I'm fine, just shaken." He stepped outside to see the destruction. I watched the disbelief on his face turn slowly into anger. "She didn't," he began. But his voice trailed off. "She did," I said softly. "Or at least, someone did it for her." He turned to me, guilt written all over his expression. "I'll talk to her." "Daniel, don't," I said quickly. "She's not in a state to listen. The more you confront her, the worse she'll get." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even recognize her anymore." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's because you were in love with who you thought she was." He didn't respond. We stood there together for a while, both staring at the ruin of what once was a peaceful home. Over the next few days, I stayed cautious. I double-checked the locks, installed new motion lights outside, and kept my phone close at night. The police increased their patrols, but I still felt uneasy. Sophia had crossed a line, and I knew people like her didn't stop at warnings. Then, just when I thought she might have finally exhausted her anger, a new envelope arrived in the mail. It was thin, formal, with an unfamiliar return address: Davis and Keller Law Offices. A cold chill ran through me. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside was a letter printed on heavy white paper, full of legal jargon. At the top, in bold, it read, "Notice of Civil Claim, Petition for Equitable Division of Marital Property." My eyes skimmed the paragraphs, each word making my heart pound faster. Sophia had filed a lawsuit against me. She was actually trying to sue me for my own house. The letter claimed that Daniel and Sophia had established residence and contributed substantially to the property's upkeep and improvement. It alleged that I was unjustly depriving them of shared marital assets. It was absurd, but it was real. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter shaking in my hand. This wasn't just petty revenge anymore. Sophia wanted to destroy me legally, to drain my time, energy, and savings. She wanted to make me miserable because she couldn't stand that she'd lost. When Daniel came over that evening, I handed him the letter silently. He read it twice, disbelief clouding his face. "She can't do this," he said finally. "She can't. She already has," I replied, my voice calm but cold. "And she won't stop until someone makes her." He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom." I reached over and touched his arm gently. "You don't need to do anything, Daniel. I'll handle this." Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just angry, I was resolute. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about standing my ground. My husband had trusted me to protect what we built, and I wasn't about to let anyone, least of all a bitter, greedy woman, tear that down. Then came a knock at the door, a lawyer with a lawsuit in his hand. Sophia actually tried to sue me for my own house. When I first read the lawsuit notice, I thought it had to be a mistake. No sane person would file a legal claim for a home that didn't belong to them, especially after a notarized meeting confirmed the truth. But as I held that letter, I realized this wasn't about logic, it was about ego. Sophia wasn't trying to win the house anymore, she was trying to punish me. The letter was full of complicated legal phrases: equitable interest, marital contribution, domestic cohabitation. It accused me of unjustly enriching myself by refusing to share jointly enjoyed assets. The claim even implied that Sophia's presence and design improvements had increased the home's value, giving her a rightful share. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so malicious. I placed the papers neatly on the kitchen table, took a deep breath, and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Caroline Whitmore, an old friend of Richard's who had once been our family's legal advisor. She was a calm, confident attorney with a reputation for precision and a knack for cutting through nonsense. "Helena," she said warmly when she answered. "It's been too long. What's going on?" "Caroline," I said, my voice shaking just slightly. "I think I'm being sued by my daughter-in-law." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, what?" I explained everything from the start. Richard's passing, the notary meeting, Sophia's obsession, the vandalism, and finally the lawsuit. Caroline listened quietly, occasionally making small noises of disbelief. When I finished, she said in her firm professional tone, "Bring everything to my office tomorrow. We'll sort this out." The next morning, I arrived with a folder so thick it could barely close. Caroline spread the documents across her desk like puzzle pieces. Richard's deed transfer, the notary's statement, photos of the vandalism, even screenshots of Sophia's online boasts. After an hour of reviewing, Caroline looked up and smiled faintly. "Helena? She doesn't have a case, not even close." Relief washed over me. "Are you sure?" "Positive," she said confidently. "Your husband transferred ownership years ago. The house is your separate property. Marriage doesn't automatically grant Sophia rights to something she didn't help acquire. Even if she redecorated, that's not a legal contribution. And since she wasn't on any mortgage or deed, she has no standing." I exhaled, tension releasing from my shoulders. "So what happens now?" "We'll respond formally," Caroline said, already writing notes. "I'll draft a counterstatement denying every claim. But more importantly, we'll make this public record. Once it's dismissed, there'll be no question about who owns that home." I nodded. I want her lies to end. That week was one of the longest of my life. Sophia's tantrums had moved from whispers to full-blown rants online. She posted dramatic videos about being betrayed by family and losing everything to greed. Her followers flooded my social media pages with hateful comments. "You should be ashamed. Give the girl what's hers. Old people always think they can control everything." I didn't respond, not once. Silence, I decided, would be my power. When the official court date arrived, I dressed simply in black slacks and a cream blouse. I didn't want to look angry or proud, just steady. Daniel met me outside the courthouse, his face pale. "I don't even know how to face her," he said quietly. "You don't need to," I told him gently. "The truth will do that for you." Sophia arrived moments later, stepping out of her car like she was walking a red carpet. A photographer, probably from one of her friends in media, snapped pictures as she adjusted her sunglasses and strutted toward the building. Her lawyer followed behind her, looking far less confident. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense but formal. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, presided with quiet authority. Sophia sat across the room, pretending to look composed, but I saw the twitch in her jaw, the small, nervous movement that betrayed her bravado. Her lawyer began the argument, painting a story of shared life, shared labor, and shared assets. He spoke about Sophia contributing to the family's well-being, upgrading the property, and acting in good faith. When he finished, the judge turned to Caroline. "Your response?" Caroline stood slowly, adjusting her glasses. Her voice was calm but carried weight. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of contribution or co-ownership, it's a case of entitlement." She laid out the facts one by one, the date of the ownership transfer, Richard's notarized statement, my long-term residence, and Sophia's own public admissions that she moved in after the title was already in my name. Then, Caroline held up printed screenshots of Sophia's posts videos, where she called the house my husband's inheritance, our home, and the estate we're blessed to own. "These statements," Caroline said firmly, "were made publicly, without any factual or legal basis. They demonstrate not ownership, but intent to mislead, to manipulate, and to claim something that was never hers." The courtroom was silent. Sophia's face turned bright red. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Ward," she said, addressing Sophia, Do you have documentation showing you contributed financially to this property? Mortgage payments, repairs, taxes? Sophia hesitated. I redecorated. I invested in new furniture, new curtains. That's not ownership, the judge interrupted. That's interior design. I couldn't help it. A quiet laugh escaped me. The judge leaned back in her chair. So far, I'm not hearing any evidence that would grant you equitable interest in this property. This seems more like a family disagreement than a legal dispute. Sophia's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, we believe Mrs. Ward acted in bad faith by withholding property information. Caroline stepped forward. Withholding? The plaintiff was informed directly by a certified notary. She simply didn't like the answer she received. That was the moment the case began to crumble. Sophia's composure broke completely. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, gesturing toward me. I could see her eyes glistening not with sadness, but with humiliation. The judge sighed and closed the file. I'll review all documentation before ruling, but I must be honest, Mrs. Ward, she said, looking directly at Sophia. Your claim appears unsupported. And that was that. As the session ended, Sophia brushed past me without a word. The air around her felt electric with anger. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The courtroom walls had already opened for me. That night, I sat by the window, sipping tea, watching the quiet street outside. I could finally breathe again. Or so I thought until Caroline called the next morning and said, Helena, we may have a problem. Sophia's team is calling for a second hearing. She's bringing a witness. My stomach dropped. A witness? Who? Caroline's voice was tense. Your son. But Sophia wasn't ready to lose, not yet. She had a secret witness prepared. The moment Sophia's witness walked in, my heart nearly stopped. It was Daniel. When Caroline told me over the phone that Sophia planned to bring Daniel as her witness, I thought my heart might actually give out. I sat in stunned silence, gripping the edge of my kitchen table. I couldn't believe my son was being dragged into this madness. Are you sure? I finally asked. Positive, Caroline said gently. Sophia's lawyer filed the amendment this morning. He listed Daniel Ward as a witness to support her claim of shared property usage. I pressed a hand to my forehead. She's manipulating him. He doesn't even understand what she's doing. I know, Caroline replied. But don't panic. Let's stay calm. We'll handle this carefully. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts ran wild memories of Daniel as a little boy, running through the garden, helping Richard fix things around the house. He'd always been gentle, sensitive. And now, he was caught between his mother and his wife in a courtroom battle neither of us should have ever had to fight. When the next hearing day arrived, the courthouse felt colder than before. The walls, the benches, even the faint echo of footsteps, it all felt heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Caroline gave me a reassuring nod as we entered. Just remember, she whispered, truth doesn't need theatrics, it stands on its own. Sophia sat across the aisle, dressed in a navy suit this time, her expression carefully composed. Her confidence had returned, or at least, she was pretending it had. Her eyes met mine briefly, sharp and defiant. Daniel wasn't with her. I assumed he'd been told to arrive separately as a witness. When the session began, the judge summarized the ongoing case. We are here to continue the civil proceedings between Mrs. Sophia Ward and Mrs. Helena Ward regarding alleged equitable ownership of the property at 142 Maple Drive. The plaintiff has requested to call a witness, Mr. Daniel Ward. The courtroom doors opened, and there he was. My son. He looked nervous, pale, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He didn't meet my eyes as he walked past me to take the stand. My chest tightened. Sophia's lawyer began gently, almost sympathetically. Mr. Ward, thank you for being here. I understand this is difficult for you. Could you please tell the court about your living situation at 142 Maple Drive? Daniel nodded slowly. My wife and I lived there for about 2 years after our wedding. And during that time, the lawyer continued, Did you contribute to the home's maintenance? Repairs? Upkeep? Yes, Daniel said softly. I helped fix things around the house. I paid for some improvements, new flooring in one of the rooms, and some landscaping. Sophia smiled faintly, as though she'd just won the case. The lawyer pressed on. Would you say you and your wife made that house your home together? Daniel hesitated, glancing briefly at Sophia. We lived there. Yes. But you felt it was your family home, correct? He looked down at his hands. It's where we spent time together. So yes, I guess so. I wanted to speak, to stand up and tell him this wasn't about emotions. It was about legality, but I stayed silent, trusting Caroline's earlier words. Truth doesn't need theatrics. Sophia's lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, I believe this. It supports our position that the property served as the marital home, thereby creating shared equity. Caroline stood calmly. Your Honor, may I cross-examine? The judge nodded. Caroline approached Daniel with a gentle, motherly tone. Mr. Ward, I know this isn't easy. I'll only ask a few questions. You said you and your wife lived at 142 Maple Drive, correct? Yes. And during that time, did you pay any portion of the mortgage? No, ma'am. There wasn't a mortgage. My father had paid it off years before. Did you or your wife contribute to property taxes, insurance, or structural renovations? He hesitated. No. My mother handled all that. Caroline smiled faintly. So your contributions were limited to small household projects and decor? Yes. She nodded. One more question, Daniel. Did your mother ever ask you or your wife to leave? Did she ever deny you access to the home? He shook his head immediately. No. Never. So she allowed you to live there freely, out of love and family support, correct? He looked directly at me then, and for the first time that day, his eyes softened. Yes. Out of love. Caroline turned to the judge. Your Honor, ownership requires legal and financial investment. Hospitality does not create entitlement. The defendant offered her home freely to her son and daughter-in-law. That act of generosity cannot be twisted into joint ownership. The judge nodded slowly, scribbling notes. Sophia's face tightened. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she shook her head, glaring at me across the courtroom like a cornered animal. When Caroline returned to our table, she leaned close and whispered, That was it. She's done. I watched Daniel step down from the stand. He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to go to Sophia's side or mine. Then, quietly, he sat in the audience. Neither side. The judge looked over the paperwork one final time, her expression unreadable. I've reviewed all documentation and testimony, she said finally. Based on the evidence, there is no legal foundation for the plaintiff's claim. The property remains in sole ownership of Mrs. Helena Ward. The gavel struck once, echoing through the room. Sophia went rigid, her face drained of color. Her lawyer began to speak, but the judge raised a hand. The case is dismissed. Silence followed, long, heavy, final. Sophia stood abruptly, tears glistening in her eyes, though they were born more of fury than sorrow. She shot one last look at me. You think you've won. She spat, her voice low but venomous. But you've just ruined your son's marriage. Then she turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels echoing down the marble hallway until the doors slammed shut behind her. Daniel sat motionless, staring down at his hands. I turned to him, my voice trembling with both relief and sorrow. I never wanted it to come to this, I whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes full of quiet regret. I know, Mom. I just wish I'd seen her for who she really was sooner. I reached out and squeezed his hand gently. You see her now? That's enough. Then came the judge's final words, words that would end Sophia's reign forever. Case dismissed. The property remains in full ownership of Mrs. Helena Ward. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just let the sound sink in. It felt final, absolute. Like the closing of a chapter that had dragged on far too long. Sophia, on the other hand, looked like the air had been sucked right out of her. She stood there frozen, her lawyer whispering something to her that she clearly didn't hear. The color drained from her face, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her designer purse like it might somehow hold her dignity together. For months, she had built her world on lies. And now, in a single sentence, it had all come crashing down. Daniel sat beside me, his head bowed. When the judge adjourned and the courtroom began to empty, he stayed silent for a long moment. Finally, he turned to me, his voice soft. "It's over." "Yes," I said quietly. "It's over." But even as I said it, I knew that for Sophia, it was only the beginning of her unraveling. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Sophia had made sure of that. She'd treated this lawsuit like a performance, posting updates, cryptic captions, and even a countdown to the verdict on her social media. She had invited this attention, expecting a triumphant ending. Instead, she got humiliation. As soon as she stepped out of the courthouse doors, microphones and cameras surrounded her. "Mrs. Ward, is it true you lost the case? Do you plan to appeal? Were you lying about the inheritance?" Her lips tightened. She tried to push past them with a forced smile, muttering, "No comment." But the cameras followed her like vultures. Daniel and I stood a few feet away, watching quietly as she stumbled under the weight of her own publicity. By the time I got home that evening, Sophia's name was already trending for all the wrong reasons. Influencer's inheritance lie exposed in court. Fake heiress. Local lifestyle blogger loses property battle. Court confirms widow owns home in viral inheritance scandal. The internet had turned on her just as quickly as it had once adored her. The same people who had called her brave and inspiring were now calling her fraudulent, greedy, and entitled. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching someone destroy themselves. Only a deep, quiet relief that justice, real justice, had finally been served. Later that night, Daniel came over. He looked exhausted, his eyes heavy and his voice low. "She's gone," he said. "Gone?" I asked. "She packed a few bags and left. Didn't say where. Just left a note saying she needed space." I nodded slowly, not surprised. "She'll find out soon enough that running doesn't erase guilt." He gave a faint, sad laugh. "I think she's already finding that out." Her sponsors dropped her within hours of the verdict. Her accounts are private now. She deleted half her videos. I felt a strange mix of sadness and closure. Once upon a time, I had welcomed Sophia into our home, hoping she'd be the daughter I never had. But somewhere along the line, greed and pride had devoured that possibility. "I'm sorry it ended like this," I said softly. Daniel looked down. "I should have seen it sooner. I kept thinking she'd change. That she was just ambitious." "Ambition isn't bad," I said gently. "It's only dangerous when it forgets compassion." He nodded. We sat in silence for a while. The ticking clock, the only sound between us. The next morning, I went out to the garden. The damage from her vandalism had mostly healed. New roses had begun to bloom, and the grass was growing thick and green again. I knelt down, pulling a few weeds, breathing in the scent of earth and sunlight. It felt like peace was finally returning. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Caroline. "Official notice of case closure delivered. You can rest now, Helena. You've won." I smiled, my eyes stinging with quiet tears. It wasn't about winning, not really. It was about reclaiming my life, my home, my dignity. About proving that love and truth could withstand even the ugliest kind of deceit. That evening, I lit a candle in the living room beside Richard's photo. I whispered to him, "You'd be proud, my love. Your plan worked. You protected me, even now." The flame flickered gently, as if he were answering. Sophia's name faded from headlines within days. Her channels went silent, her followers moved on to the next scandal, and life began to feel normal again. Daniel started visiting more often, sometimes helping me in the garden, sometimes just keeping me company over tea. The distance between us, once stretched by her manipulation, slowly began to close. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel said softly, "I don't know if I can forgive her, Mom." "You don't have to," I replied. "Some people aren't meant to be forgiven right away, they're meant to be lessons." He nodded, looking out at the sky. "She was a big one." "Yes," I said with a small smile. "But now, we move forward." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. The house felt lighter, warmer, alive again. Not haunted by anger or deceit, but filled with the quiet comfort of truth. But even after her downfall, there was one thing left I needed to do to save my son. Daniel came home that night, tears in his eyes, carrying his wedding ring in his palm. He stood at the door like a lost child, the same way he used to when he scraped his knees and didn't want to cry. I didn't say anything at first, I just opened my arms. He walked straight into them and broke down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of the past months, the lies, the tension, the heartbreak hung between us like thick smoke. I could feel his shoulders shaking as years of trust and confusion spilled out in silent sobs. When he finally pulled away, I guided him to the couch. His eyes were red, his hands trembling as he turned the silver band over and over between his fingers. "She's gone for good, Mom," he whispered. "I found out she emptied our joint account before she left. I didn't even care about the money, I just can't believe she'd do that." I reached over and touched his hand gently. "You can't make sense of someone who doesn't live by the same values you do, Daniel. She's been living a lie for so long, she probably believes it herself." He nodded weakly. "I kept thinking I could fix her, that if I loved her enough, she'd stop being so angry all the time." I smiled sadly. "That's the problem with kind hearts. We think love can change people, but it can't. It can only show us who they truly are." He exhaled, leaning back against the couch. "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid," I said firmly. "You were in love. And love blinds us all sometimes." For a while we just sat there, watching the soft glow of the lamp fill the room. The house felt still peaceful, almost healing. I hadn't realized until that moment how much tension Sophia had brought into these walls. It was like her presence had been a constant storm, and now, finally, the air was clear. That night, Daniel stayed for dinner. We ate quietly, the way we used to when Richard was alive, simple food, soft conversation, the comfort of being together. When we finished, he lingered in the kitchen, helping me wash dishes like he had when he was a teenager. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to think this house felt too big. Now it just feels right again." I smiled. "That's because it was never meant to be filled with noise. Just love." He chuckled softly. "You always make things sound so simple." "They are simple," I said. "People just complicate them." The next few days were quiet. Daniel moved some of his things back into the guest room, saying he needed time before deciding what to do next. I didn't mind. Having him home filled the place with warmth again. Every morning, I'd find him sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the sunrise. Sometimes, he'd talk about the little things: work, friends, the future. Other times, he'd just sit in silence, lost in thought. I gave him space, but I was there whenever he needed me. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's like tending a garden, you have to water it every day, even when nothing seems to grow. One evening, he came into the living room, holding an old photo album. "I found this in Dad's study," he said. "You two looked so happy." I smiled as he flipped through the pages. There we were, young, laughing, covered in paint from the day we built the house. There was one of Daniel as a toddler sitting on Richard's shoulders, his tiny hands gripping his father's hair. "He adored you," I whispered. "You were his whole world." Daniel smiled faintly. "You both were mine." He paused, his thumb brushing over a picture of Richard standing in the garden, a proud smile on his face. "Do you think he'd be disappointed in me?" My throat tightened. "Never. Your father believed in learning through pain. He used to say, 'Mistakes don't define us. They refine us.' You've been refined, Daniel, not ruined." He looked at me, tears shining in his eyes again. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," I said softly. And I'm not going anywhere. We spent that night talking until nearly midnight. About Richard, about the past, about what came next. When Daniel finally went to bed, I sat alone in the living room for a while, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. I thought about everything that had happened, the arrogance, the lies, the lawsuits, and how easily bitterness could have taken root in my heart. But instead, there was only peace. I realized that revenge hadn't brought me this feeling, truth had. The next morning, Daniel knocked on my door before heading to work. "Mom," he said softly. "Thank you. For everything." I smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead like I used to when he was a boy. "Go live your life, sweetheart. The past is over. You're free now." He nodded and left, his steps lighter than they'd been in months. Watching him drive away, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. That evening, I went out to the garden again. The roses Richard had planted were in full bloom, their crimson petals glowing under the sunset. I knelt down and pressed my fingers to the soil. It was warm, alive, forgiving. "Everything heals," I whispered. "Even this." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I finally understood. Sophia had taken her lies, her greed, her chaos, but she hadn't taken what mattered. She hadn't taken my family, my peace, or my strength. In the end, she had lost everything, and I had reclaimed everything she tried to steal without lifting a single cruel word. And just when I thought everything was calm, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. The final letter from Mr. Langford brought me to tears, but this time, they were happy ones. It arrived on a calm Tuesday morning, tucked neatly between a gardening magazine and an electricity bill. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed carefully with a blue Notary stamp on the back. The handwriting was unmistakable, Mr. Langford's neat, precise, and dignified, just like the man himself. For a brief moment, I wondered if Sophia had somehow resurfaced. If this was about another legal matter or some forgotten piece of paperwork from the case. My stomach tensed as I turned it over in my hands. But then I noticed the words written in pen above my name. Personal, from the office of Richard Ward's estate. I sat down at the kitchen table, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter and a smaller sealed envelope. The first page bore Mr. Langford's familiar signature. "Dear Mrs. Ward, I came across this document while archiving your late husband's files. It appears Mr. Ward left this note to be delivered to you privately, once all legal matters surrounding his estate were concluded. I thought now would be the right time to send it. With deepest respect, Harold Langford." My heart skipped a beat. I set his letter aside and stared at the smaller envelope, the one sealed in dark red wax. Richard's handwriting bold, steady, unmistakably, his spelled out. My name, for Helena. I hesitated before opening it. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a rush of emotion I hadn't felt in years. It had been so long since I'd seen his handwriting, so long since I'd heard his voice. I broke the seal gently and unfolded the note inside. The smell of old paper filled the air, a scent that, oddly enough, reminded me of the first time we'd moved into this house together. And then, there it was, Richard's words, written in ink that had slightly faded with time but still strong, still him. My dearest Helena, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side, at least not in the way I'd like to be. But I hope you can feel me there, in the walls we built, the garden we planted, and the laughter we shared within these rooms. You were always the heart of our home. You kept it warm, alive. I may have laid the bricks, but you gave it soul. When I transferred the house into your name, I did it quietly because I knew you'd argue that it wasn't necessary. You never wanted more than your share, but Helena, you were my share, the best part of me. I wanted to make sure you would never lose what we built together, no matter who tried to take it away. If life has tested you by now, remember this. The home is not just wood and walls. It's your strength, your story, and your love that keeps it standing. With all my heart, Richard. By the time I reached the end, tears were falling freely down my cheeks. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling his words as though they were a heartbeat, steady, gentle, eternal. For so long I had been fighting battles against lies, against greed, against loneliness. But this letter wasn't about battle, it was about peace. It was Richard's final act of love, his quiet reassurance that even in his absence I was never truly alone. When Daniel came home that evening, I showed him the letter. He read it slowly, his eyes glistening. "Dad was always one step ahead," he said softly. "Yes," I replied with a shaky smile. He knew exactly what he was doing. We framed the letter that same night. I chose a simple walnut frame. Richard would have liked that. It now hangs above the fireplace, right where Sophia once filmed her hollow boasts. Only this time, the truth sits there in plain sight for all to see. Every time I walk past it, I feel Richard near me, his presence lingering in the hum of the walls, in the warmth of the evening lights spilling across the living room. The following weekend, Daniel and I spent the day repairing what was left of the garden fence. As we worked side by side, I noticed how different he seemed, calmer, lighter, as though he had finally let go of something heavy. When we finished, he looked out across the garden and smiled faintly. "You know, Mom," he said, "Dad would be proud of you. Of all of this." I looked around the blooming roses, the sunlight glinting off the windows, the house standing strong and proud, and I knew he was right. "I think he already is," I said. That night, after Daniel went to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the stars. The world was quiet again. No chaos, no lies, no noise. Just peace. The kind of peace Richard always brought into my life. For the first time since he'd passed, I whispered aloud, "Thank you, my love, for everything." And in that moment, a soft breeze swept through the garden, carrying the faintest scent of roses, the ones he planted all those years ago. I smiled through my tears, certain it was his way of answering back. Everything that had happened, the deceit, the humiliation, the court battles had led me right here. To this stillness. To this reminder that truth, love, and integrity always outlast greed. And though Sophia had taken her bitterness elsewhere, I knew that someday, she'd have to face herself. Lies may travel far, but they always find their way home. As for me, I finally had everything I ever needed: my house, my peace, my son, and the quiet, everlasting echo of Richard's words, "You were always the heart of our home." Because the truth, once read aloud, has a way of silencing every lie.